Welcome to Her Remarkable History. Remember, to support our channel, please subscribe. The Forgotten Lady That Buried Anne Boleyn. One of the most shocking moments of the Tudor period was when Anne Boleyn made her way to the Tower of London as she was accused of treason and adultery. The second wife of Henry VIII is today considered a victim of the king, her husband, as Henry needed a way out of his second marriage, and he tasked Thomas Cromwell to sort the problem out for him. But Anne Boleyn, inside of the Tower of London, must have known that things would not end well for her, and she was then tried and condemned to death. But appointed to keep her company and wait upon her whilst inside the Tower of London were a number of ladies, and these weren't the most loyal servants of the Queen. These were women who were tasked with spying and keeping an eye on Anne in her final moments within the confines of the prison she was held in. Cromwell had appointed these women to tell of any possible evidence which could be used against her for treason. But one of these ladies has been forgotten and lost to time, and very little exists about her and who she was. So who is the forgotten lady that buried Anne Boleyn? Elizabeth Chambers' date of birth isn't well known, but she was the daughter of Geoffrey Chambers of Stanmore. It's believed that through her father's position at court she was able to gain access to the royal court. Her father worked as an agent and a surveyor for Thomas Cromwell during the dissolution of the monasteries, and he was given significant wealth and land because of this. This also meant he would have been known to King Henry VIII, but Elizabeth had been a lady-in-waiting to each of Henry's wives, all 6 of them, meaning that she was very well connected at court, and she would have dealt with the trials and tribulations of Henry VIII's love life, and also helped to manage other ladies deal with this too. She would have served Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and finally Catherine Parr. And it's believed with his later wives she was known as Mother of the Maids, and was in charge of looking after their behaviour and conduct of the younger maids of honour. She would have almost took these women on as an apprentice, but strangely, Elizabeth Chamber was a survivor compared to the other ladies who served 1 or 2 queens, and she was certainly a survivor when compared to the king's wives. Why is this? One possibility is the fact she may have been in very high royal favour following her actions towards Anne Boleyn, Henry VIII's second wife. Elizabeth had married Sir Walter Stonner, but in May of 1536 there was just 5 women who were appointed to serve Anne Boleyn while she was imprisoned in the Tower of London. Anne was taken by barge into her royal prison, and it was clear that she was being victimised. She was a woman who had split England in 2, but the fact she could not produce a male heir led to her falling from grace, and the king by this time had also begun to court one of her ladies-in-waiting, Jane Seymour, and it was known that Henry VIII wished to marry her. Jane caused Anne to rage at times, and the king did not hide his affections for Jane. Cromwell was tasked with scheming and plotting Anne's downfall. He chose to accuse her of crimes that would see her executed rather than exiled or become a divorced woman. Cromwell thought the only way out of this was the axe. As Cromwell trusted Elizabeth's father, it was likely that he trusted Elizabeth too, and she was selected as one of the women to attend on Anne while she was in the Tower, and ultimately spy on the Queen, and to provide Cromwell with whatever evidence she could gather that would secure a guilty verdict in a treason trial. Because of this, she would have been considered a valuable asset, and this is possibly why Henry VIII allowed her to later serve as a lady-in-waiting to the other wives that he had. Elizabeth's task inside of the Tower of London was to report anything that was said by Anne Boleyn back to Cromwell and his companions, as they had hoped anything said in the confines of the Tower to these ladies would be used at trial. Anne was practically surrounded by 5 spies, who were watching her every moment, but also willing to help her perform daily duties such as dressing and so on. They were there also to wait upon the Queen and to help her with anything she required, and it is possible that Anne may have suspected the women appointed to serve her. But ultimately, also these were women who were there to bury her, and these would be the women who collected her remains from the executioner's scaffold, and then carried them into the chapel inside of the tower's walls, where she was then interred. The other women who had been appointed to serve Anne Boleyn were Anne Shelton, Elizabeth Boleyn, Mary Kingdom, and Margaret Coffin, the wife of Anne's master of the horse. Anne would have liked her closest friends and ladies with her, and not these women, who were appointed to serve her. These women were regularly interrogated for information and spoken to about this, but ultimately, inside the walls of the palace that became her prison, she was sentenced to death. This execution took place also within the tower, and she was given what was considered a private execution, protected by the tower's thick walls and away from the eyes and gaze of the public. She was accompanied by the 5 ladies until the very end, including Elizabeth Chamber. It was said that she went out of the Queen's lodgings and passed through the Cold Harbour Gate, along the western side of the White Tower, to the black draped scaffold. She was helped up the steps by William Kingston, the Constable of the Tower, and her ladies also waited nearby for her. Despite the execution being private, around 200 dignitaries had been summoned to witness the proceedings, and Anne spoke to them, saying, "Good Christian people, I have not come here to preach a sermon, I have come here to die. For according to the law, and by the law, I am judged to die. And therefore I will speak nothing against it. I am come hither to accuse no man, nor to speak of what whereof I am accused and condemned to die. But I pray God save the King, and send him long to reign over you. For a gentler, nor a more merciful prince was there never, and to me he was ever a good, a gentle, and sovereign lord. And if any person will meddle of my cause, I require them to judge the best. And thus I take my leave of the world, and of you all, and I heartily desire you all to pray for me." Then her ladies stepped forward, and removed her mantle, and her little neck was shown to the crowd, and the women, including Elizabeth Chamber, sobbed and cried, seeing the moving sight of Anne Boleyn approaching the executioner, the famous sword of Calais. The silence was deafening, as the executioner was approaching her to strike, and in one swift and sharp swing of the sword, Anne Boleyn's head fell onto the scaffold. Her blood flowed across it, and after the executioner had departed, her ladies then gathered up her remains. Elizabeth would have been part of this, and the Queen's head was picked up from the straw and was then placed with her body in an old elm chest which was once containing bow staves. She was not given a proper burial, and her sobbing ladies then took them into the Tower's chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula. It was on the 19th of May 1536 that a Queen of England was executed. Elizabeth Chamber, after the death of Anne Boleyn, remained a constant throughout the court of Henry VIII's other wives, and she was also married 4 times. Her first husband was Walter Stonner, who later became the Lieutenant of the Tower of London. However, he died in 1551. Following this, she married Reginald Conyers, who died in 1560, and then a third husband, Edward Griffin, died in 1569, and he was the Attorney General. But then she married Oliver St. John, the first Baron St. John of Bletsoe, meaning that all of Elizabeth Chamber's husbands died. Elizabeth Chamber then died some time after, on the 8th of December 1602. But she is remembered as a woman who served the 6 wives of Henry VIII, and who was known as the Mother of the Maids. She must have been very well respected during the Tudor times, as she was a woman who remained with Anne Boleyn until the very end. Anne Boleyn's execution was a shocking one, and Elizabeth Chamber was a woman who witnessed this brutal, historic moment, and had an intimate knowledge of the executed Queen. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.